We're here in sunny South Wales. We have an OM System OM1 Mark II, a 90mm macro f3.5 and a ring flash. That can only mean one thing: we're doing macro. Let's go find some bugs, some fungi and some insects. Let's go. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of what we're doing today, I think it's important to mention that I am a complete novice when it comes to doing macro photography. I've used macro lenses a lot over the years, but never as a true kind of macro lens in the way that most people understand macro to be. So especially in the area that we're in today, we're trying to kind of get wildlife, insects, moss, just anything interesting that we can really kind of focus in on. I've got a ring flash, which I've got simply because I know that a lot of macro photographers use a ring flash. I'm not sure how that's going to work exactly. So I'm kind of using my experience as a photographer to try and understand kind of what it is that I need and what it is that I need to do. So there might be things that you might want to do, like shoot fully open all the time, especially when you're at one-to-one magnification, which I know is not something that you necessarily want to do. So there are things that I do understand. So please, if there's anything that I'm getting wrong, please mention it in the comments below. So we've chosen this glorious waterfall behind me here to introduce the equipment that we're actually shooting with today. So we'll begin right at the front of the setup here. So first we have a ring flash by Godox. It's a pretty basic unit, but it pretty much does everything we need. It's entirely manual, so the settings go from full power all the way to 1/32. That's a really good way to modulate the amount of flash that you're getting from your exposures. On the lens, we have a 90mm f3.5 by OM System, and it's an awesome lens. It has manual focus capabilities just by flipping this ring all the way back. And obviously you can activate peaking in the camera to make sure that you actually nail focus, which is incredibly important when you're at one-to-one magnification. Other than that, it has optical image stabilization, or IS, and it has 3 focus modes. It has one for macro, one for 0.25 to 0.5 meters, and one from 0.25 to infinity. So it is a multi-purpose lens, but obviously today we'll be using it for macro. And then we have the camera behind all of this, doing all of the work for us. So the camera is an OM System OM1 Mark II. It's a micro four thirds camera with 20 megapixel resolution. Now you might think that's not a lot, but it actually has 2 high resolution modes. One is handheld, which will allow you to do 50 megapixels, and the second one is 80 megapixels if you choose to go on a tripod. It's a pretty great camera, incredibly robust, very, very fast as well. But obviously today we're not really focusing on its speed. We're actually focusing on getting in really close and getting that fine detail. So we'll see if we can actually employ that high resolution mode a bit later on. So I think it's important at this stage, now that I've got a few shots kind of out the way, to kind of share some of my initial thoughts and see how they compare to what I believed today would go like. So one of the first things I said, if you remember, was the fact that you might be tempted to actually try and shoot fully open all the time, just to get that incredible level of defocus. And I think there is space for doing that, but I think you have to use it sparingly. I think what I'm finding is that I tend to be shooting somewhere between 6.3 and about f11, f16 sometimes, because the way macro basically works is in the same way that a really long lens works. That's kind of how I see it. So for example, I can achieve the same level of defocus with a really long lens shooting at f9 because you're using the length of the lens and the magnification that it gives you to actually get defocus. And I think macro works in the same way. So even when you're shooting at f11, you're so close to something that just because of that distance, it makes everything fall away in a really pleasing way. So you don't have to be afraid of shooting at apertures of between f6 and f11, for example. So that's the one thing that I'm finding. The other thing that I'm finding is you have to be very selective with focus as well. So sometimes you might toggle between manual focus and an autofocus, but making sure that you have that ability to actually use the joysticks to place a focus where you need it, which is why this particular lens from OM System is really, really helpful, because that is actually really, really quick. Sometimes you have a switch but you might miss, whereas with this you know immediately that by holding that lens barrel and moving it back and forward, you're toggling between manual focus and autofocus, which is really, really great if you're actually struggling to get something at extreme magnifications. So now that we've introduced the equipment, let's talk a little bit about what I found out after using each component of the setup. So let's start with the flash. I thought I'd be using it all day today, and I actually haven't. It's only been very sparing how much I've been using it. So I actually found that I was using it when I wanted to get a bit more creative. So I would try and balance the background light against the foreground light, but obviously because it's firing directly at the subject matter, it means that you do have to watch your exposure. So you are kind of riding the exposure settings on the back of the flash unit, which is absolutely fine. Luckily, with the subject matters that we're shooting, they are static, so you do have time. So that brings me on to your subject. So you have static subjects and non-static subjects. And one thing that we don't have today actually is a tripod. Now, a tripod can be very, very handy to minimize the variables in the chances of you getting something in focus. So when you're at 1:1 magnification, or close to it at least, if you have a subject that's moving, let's say a leaf that's blowing in the wind, even very slightly, and you're swaying quite naturally just because of your body just naturally swaying, it means that you're doubling the chance of something being out of focus. By having a tripod in place, it actually makes it a little bit easier if you're using autofocus for your autofocus to actually lock onto your subject and even maybe track it. It's difficult, but it is possible. However, if you're both swaying, it means that your chances of actually getting something in focus diminishes, so you just do have to be patient. So I would say do bring a tripod to minimize that. In terms of the camera and lens, I would say they're both helping you massively in terms of helping you get the shot. Between them, they have about 8.5 stops of image stabilisation, and you really do feel that's working in your favour, especially when you're handheld. And that actually brings me on to my next point, is bring a tripod. And mainly I would say is due to fatigue, for me at least. And that's not to say that this setup is heavy. If anything, it's one of the lighter setups out there for macro photography. But I would say when you're really, really struggling to nail focus in that exact spot on the bud of a flower, you end up standing there for quite a long time in very awkward positions sometimes to try and get that perfect framing, and you can get very tired. Having something like a tripod means that you can actually wait, for example, for the wind to stop blowing and the bud, for example, to stop moving around so much, so you can actually nail focus. So I would say always bring a tripod. In terms of the light is a fantastic addition to this, especially if you want to get more creative. For example, if you want to balance your compositions and balance your foreground against your subject. I think, as everyone knows with macro, it's really all about the lens and its ability to do magnification at 1:1. And 1:1 really means that what you're seeing is being reproduced almost exactly life size in your viewfinder. I would say that this lens was fantastic in terms of allowing me to step away from a subject so I'm not at risk of disturbing any wildlife. Other than that, I would say that this focal length is pretty much perfect, but you could even go to something 100mm in the full frame equivalent. So if it was for the micro four thirds system, something like a 45mm, or the 60 that I had in the bag that I didn't actually use that much today. But finally, in terms of macro, it's incredibly good fun. It keeps you really focused on your surroundings and keeps you very, very present from a photographic point of view. It does take perseverance and a lot of patience, but I can assure you it is incredibly rewarding. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.